Hey, what's up guys? Chris Jr. here for Kriscoart. It's getting pretty chilly in LA. Weather is getting pretty cool, which is why I have this beanie. That's totally the reason, and not because I completely messed up my own haircut that I tried to give myself. It's not easy, but I'm gonna try to learn. I'm gonna try to cut my own hair, but that's not what this video is about. We're talking about how to shoot, how to light, how to film live sessions for a singer, for a band, and how to maximize the amount of quality and production value and performance that you can get in a very limited amount of time. So I've been in a few of these situations. They can be really fun, really experimental, but they can be also very stressful because your whole job is to capture a performance, make sure that you're getting that right, and also making it seem otherworldly and making it seem amazing with what you can bring to the table as a filmmaker and as a visual artist. And that can be pretty daunting, especially when you're working with top-notch musicians. They're performing a great take, you know, the drummer is doing his own thing and the energy levels up here. You don't want to miss that because you're not prepared, because you're slipping up with the focus. And so since I literally just shot another live session for a music studio here in LA, I wanted to kind of share those mental steps, those preparation moments, those guidelines that I've kind of set up for myself in order to sort of standardize some of the steps that can take a lot of the stress out when you're shooting live sessions. So before going through these steps and through these ideas, I actually want to talk a little bit about why you would want to consider doing live sessions for artists, for singers, for musicians as a filmmaker. I personally found a lot of growth, a lot of networking opportunities with this very specific niche within filmmaking, within shooting. And it's been a really amazing way to connect with different types of artists, being there for the artists and just capturing them and really learning how they flow, how the whole set of musicians and the whole band, how they flow through the song and how you want to kind of go with them and almost perform with them. There's kind of like a very special and intimate connection that gets formed through live sessions, and it's honestly much more accessible for filmmakers to propose, to do, because you don't need a budget for a music video. You don't need these crazy, you know, super creative and original concepts. You could just show up to a studio and shoot. And that's the beauty and the challenge of it, because what you're often faced with is either a very barren and empty recording room or a studio, or just, you know, you're kind of boxed in into one environment that people may or may not have seen already, and you want to make that look as interesting as possible. So that's kind of the challenge. That's how do you kind of evoke the feeling of the song, and how do you match the vibe and the style of the artist when you're placed in a room that's been used by so many other artists. And that was one of my biggest challenges when I flew to Berlin for the live sessions that I did for my very good friend and very talented friend, Stephen Eli. And we were essentially in this beautiful mansion studio. It was gorgeous to look at, but nevertheless, it was still the same room, the same environment for different sets of songs that were telling very different stories, that were communicating different feelings. So there's a lot that goes into mood, into really extracting those themes out of the song, out of the singer, and adapting them into your visual style. Now, that gets very ambiguous, that gets very personal and subjective, so I might just kind of dedicate a whole other video for just that, so we can kind of have more of a conversation. I'm not really sure how to structure it because, again, it's a lot about personal process, and I'm not sure how to really put that in an educational way. But what we will go over in today's video are some of the more objective and things that you can kind of standardize every time you hit these projects, every time you go into these kind of shooting scenarios. So one of the first things that I really recommend you guys in general, not just with live sessions, but with any type of shooting, is having a day to pre-light, for camera prep, just to get your head in the space and start kind of planning and figuring things out before the band enters and before it's go time and you have to shoot. This has been such a help for me whenever I've done it, and it's been such a detrimental element to a lot of failures that I've had on shoots. The more that you can prepare, obviously you know this, the better it is, but when it comes to being in that space, you actually can go there and set up lights and experiment, have stand-ins, use your fist. We've talked about this. Like, there's different ways that you can kind of calibrate and understand light in your scene and move things around before you actually have subjects walk into your set or the performers themselves. So this was very key for me because I knew I wanted to get a really nice moody lighting. I wanted to experiment in different ways that I've never really tried before. So for example, one of the things that I wanted to test out beforehand was getting a nice top-down overhead light on the singer so that we could really focus on him. And what I did to achieve this was kind of converting these backdrop stands. So they're usually used to hold essentially what I'm using here, like paper backdrops. And I kept the tube that connected those two stands, and instead of putting a backdrop, I just kind of clamped a light. And I've talked about clamps. You should have them. Just go to Home Depot. They're like a few bucks, and having 2 or 3 of them can really help you out in a lot of situations. So I clamped that light, and then what I wanted to do for the background is have the 120D, which is what I'm using right now for my key, but I actually wanted to have it more in a spotlight configuration. So let me grab it. So instead of actually putting the dome on it or leaving it open face, I put this Fresnel attachment, and I've kind of loosened this up, and I've made sure that my spotlight beam was nice and narrow. And then I put a blue gel, blue-ish, it's kind of the same gel that I'm using here for my kicker, on here, and that created a nice shaft of light, almost like the spotlight, which kind of adds a lot to the idea of performance. Get those layers. Those I knew were gonna be the lights that really established the mood and the tone of this scene. Then after that, I didn't really have that many more lights to play with because I don't own a big lighting arsenal. I usually rent for bigger shoots. So it was definitely a case of trying to do more with less. And we actually had a last-minute surprise on the day of shooting where there was going to be 2 added persons into the setup, which were the backup singers. So I had to do some on-the-fly moves, but I was able to do that and have that freedom and not stress out over it because everything else was taken care of. And then the 2 other tube lights, the ice lights too, that I had were used to kind of highlight, to kind of act as kickers or more subtle key for the subject whenever I was focusing more on him. So it was very important for me to get the perfect, like beauty lighting on the subject as a priority first, so the main singer, and then as I was moving through the scene, through different takes, I would just move lights around to highlight whatever else I was paying attention to. And this brings me to a side note point. Understand if you're shooting a singer or a band, or what role are the other musicians playing in this song. This gets tricky because of course there's people egos involved, and you sometimes don't know if you should capture everyone or just one person. How consistent are the band members? Are they a key player in their vision, in their music, in their song? So based on that, you're gonna know how much coverage you're gonna need and how much attention you're gonna need to spend on every other band member. So in this case, I kind of got the vibe that this song was more about him. It was a personal, emotional song that he was putting out from him, and the rest of the band members were there in support of that. So that's a very important distinction because that is entirely different from a rock band where every piece is like contributing to something and they're all telling their part. Then it becomes a more collaborative swing of things versus really paying your attention to one person. Now, in this live session, of course, I showed the keyboard player when he was having his solo. I showed parts of the drum when he was having like cool moments, but most of the attention would always draw back to the main singer because that's what this was about. Now, selecting your attention this way doesn't just stop there. What I really recommend you guys do whenever you're in a live shooting scenario, depending on how many takes you can actually get out of the artist, out of the band, you're gonna wanna section them. And this varies. So let's say that you're shooting with one camera, which is my case in most of these live sessions. You wanna section off and kind of compartmentalize the performance. So you wanna maybe move from the singer, focus on them for one whole take, and then you wanna maybe move to the drummer and focus on them for one whole take. Even if at times they're just kind of like going with it, nothing special is happening, you still wanna be on them. And there was even moments where I was just pointing the camera at, for example, the backup singers, and they weren't singing. They were just kind of like there, As awkward as it might look in camera, it doesn't matter. I know that I'm still gonna make sure that that full take has all the coverage that I need for every moving element, so that later when I'm in the editing stage, I can overlap all those takes together and I can select the best moments that way. And by the way, we're not gonna get into the editing side of things in this video, but I did make a full tutorial yesterday, so check that out if you're also interested in what to do once you've captured all the material. But the point of this is that you have long takes of each component of the live session, so that then you can really dial in your attention to that one musician, kind of study them. Even in the moments where they're not shining and the drummer's not having his crazy drum solo, you're still kind of getting in the groove of him. You're still, kind of allowing yourself to sync up with him, so that when that moment happens, when they really want to shine on camera, you're right there with them and you're ready and you've been grooving with them for that full take. So I really recommend you guys move along in your scene in this sort of way. So start with what your priority is. So in this case was the main singer. So I made sure I had all my takes. I had a wide shot that captured most of his movements. Then I went into close-ups. Then I moved to the keyboard player, got him for a full take, for inserts, all that stuff, the solo, one full take, then the drummer, then the backup singers. And at that point, you would have run already by 4 or 5 takes. And if you have time, at that point, you can go for pickups, you can go for experimentation or sections of the song, depending on the amount of liberty that you have with the musicians. So, to wrap it up, this was a lot of information, so I just want to make sure that you get this point because it's so crucial. Make sections of the performances. Make sure that you're getting enough coverage, get all your wides, and then if you have time, go for close-ups, go for detail shots, and if you don't have the luxury of time for those moments, run through your scene and try to get the most that you can in one take if you have to do it that way. And one last thing that I'll add about this point is, if you are doing that kind of movement where you have to capture more than one person in one take, leave that to the very end, so that by that point you will have had time to really learn the song, to learn their performances and the performers' quirks and special moments that you want to make sure to capture, so that when you're going around, it's not an aimless like, oh my god, what am I shooting, who do I get? It's more of like, oh, I know that there's this part coming up in the drum break, so let me focus on that. And trust me guys, thinking in this sort of way, having this sort of game plan when you're going into live sessions, but honestly, any type of performance piece, it will help you so much. Let me grab my phone because I kind of want to show you guys a little bit about how to navigate. We're talking about running around in the studio and getting all these performances, but it's a lot easier said than done, because you don't really think about this when you're planning or thinking about shooting a live session recording. But once you step into a studio and those guys are actually recording, they're actually hooked up with mics, there are wires, guitar pedals, and just amps and a bunch of stuff everywhere. And it's this type of stuff that you don't want to trip over or smash, because I mean, some of the microphones that we were using for this live session cost like tens of thousands of dollars. So you definitely don't want to trip in that situation. And I was mostly handheld, which we'll talk about camera and lenses in a sec, but what I kept doing was, okay, let's say that you guys are the drummer or the performer, so I'm trying to capture you. Well, let's say I want to get like a nice fluid movement like that around you guys. I'm not just gonna, just freely walk around and do that, because my risk of tripping over things, especially when I'm focused on the composition and focus, it's very likely. So what I would do is I would plant myself. And this is a good thing to do in general, but you want to plant yourself in a way that you have full range from A to B. A being your first initial mark, and B being where you're gonna go. Because then you're kind of reducing the footprint of yourself in the scene and how much you're moving your feet versus, doing more of a swing to it. Now, as ridiculous that might seem, it'll really save you a lot in terms of potentially damaging something, but also in terms of having a really fluid movement, because you're not stepping, you're not stomping, you're not going up and down, you're really just focusing on your arms and torso, and you can get a lot more smooth movements. And that is key when you're handheld, that is key when you're getting performances, but especially when you don't want to trip over stuff. So I mentioned camera, lenses. You guys know how I feel about cameras. You don't need the fanciest new thing, but I'm not completely blind to how helpful new gear is. And if you can afford it, if you have the type of tools that can make your life easier, then go for it. So what I used for the live session was an A7S Mark II with actually the same setup that I'm using right now. So the A7S Mark II with the Tamron 15 to 30 millimeter, great lens. And the reason why I picked this setup is because this lens right here has internal stabilization. And so does the sensor inside the A7S Mark II. So by combining these two, you actually get some almost gimbal-like movements that once you bring into Premiere and you stabilize with Warp Stabilizer, can get you some good stuff. So that is why I specifically chose these lenses. And then of course for close-ups, I use my 7200, again, with internal stabilization. All of the shots that you're seeing were handheld. So it's all about how you grip it. With a longer lens, I'm trying to lock myself down a little bit more, control my breathing. With wider lens, I actually do the opposite. I keep myself loose because I'm moving more. Let me know if you guys are interested in seeing like some of those ideas kind of broken down even further. But that's essentially my main setup when I'm going into a very changing environment. So I have my 15-30, I can get all the coverage, the master shots, the wides, and then I love the 7200. I love that range. I love being able to punch into details and just see how people's expressions are and how, you know, all the components of the guitar. I love seeing that up and close, and I think that for live sessions, it's just great. But again, that's just the way I shoot. That's my preference. All right, and speaking of subjective territory, let's go over some other ideas that could work for you, could not. This is just something that I personally like to think about when I'm shooting these type of things. And that is to match the vibe, match the artist, what they're trying to say, what their themes are, their personality, their style. Don't go in thinking like, oh, I saw this picture on Instagram with this lighting setup, I would love to try that out and do it. If that doesn't match what their artist is trying to say in the song, it's gonna feel really awkward and not a good fit. So this is something that you have to think about in the very, very beginning of everything. Even before planning your lights, planning whatever else, you really need to think about what is the artist about, what are they trying to say, and based on that, you wanna kind of extract those feelings and highlight them even more with the way you're moving with the camera, with the way you're lighting. So these are all things that you need to make sure that you're doing that will match the style and the vibe of the artist. That is very important. And like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I'm gonna make a video on just this, exploring mood, the themes, and how to extract that through lighting and through the different movements that you can do. So until then, I hope that you guys found this useful in terms of some of the things that you can think about when you are going into that. For some of you guys, a new type of situation, new type of shooting. It's very exciting. I think it can be very freeing because you essentially have a room and it's like a sandbox and you can do whatever you want and experiment and get all these really cool looks. And most importantly, you're right there with the artist that made a song and you're grooving with them and you're capturing that magic. I find that so special. And of course, that actually happens when you have good musicians and good music. So that's another thing. Try to align yourself with people that you would actually want to listen to and that you find inspiring or talented. I'm probably going to continue this month's theme of music video related stuff. If you guys haven't checked out the last music video I dropped, it's a full like double exposure music video. I've broken it down in a lot of different aspects of it. So we already looked at how to do the double exposure, how to do these trippy kaleidoscopic elements. So definitely go in and take a look back at that if you're interested in that sort of thing, but also let me know in what you're interested in seeing next. Thank you guys so much for watching. If this is your first time on this channel, consider subscribing for more filmmaking, VFX, editing related things. And if you found this video useful, please give it a like, and I would really appreciate that. All right guys, thank you so much for watching. My name is Chris Trini for Kriscoart, and I will see you next time.